part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
This week on the Full 40 Podcast, we're going to dive into this week in college basketball, the games that have happened. We're going to recap those, and the games that will happen, we're going to look ahead to those. Next up, we're going to talk about some bracketology as well. Joey Brackets has updated his bracket yet again, and I have some issues with where some teams sit. We're also going to talk some risers and fallers as well, and kind of keep track of that as the season finishes up here. And last but not least, we're going to go over some recruiting news, an interesting story out of Kentucky, as well as talking about the recruiting board. So without further ado, let's get into it. What's good, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast. I am your host, and I go by the name of Taylor Vanderbilt. First and foremost, I would love to thank the Press Play Podcast Network, where this podcast is hosted. They gave me an opportunity, so I always want to make sure I thank them. This week, man, we have a lot to dive into. A lot of great games happened. Like I said, we're deep into conference play, so it's going to be a really, really fast sprint and fun finish to the season. But yeah, so first up, man, I want to dive into this week in college basketball, as we do every week, talking about the games that have happened, the games that will happen. And first up, man, I want to start off with Illinois and Purdue. So Illinois and Purdue played this week. It was a very, very good game. It was a close game, but honestly, I felt as if Purdue would close it out in the second half. It was one of those where you feel like a team just kind of has control, even though it's a close game. But they slipped up and let the Illini back in it. Ultimately, they ended up pulling it out in double OT. But it was an interesting note about that is that Kofi Cockburn really didn't have the greatest game, and he ended up fouling out. So I always like to say, I wonder what would have happened if, he plays well or he doesn't foul out. I think they might have pulled it out. It might have went the other way, and Illinois might have gotten the W. But all in all, it was a really, really good game. I really enjoyed it. It was fun to watch. I think the Big Ten, like I said, the Big Ten and the Big 12 are my two favorite conferences this year, and I really think they're continuing to show how strong they are about having all these close games, including some we'll get into later. Next up is a game that I unfortunately don't want to talk about, but I have to, is Duke and Florida State. From a fan's perspective, watching the game, I kind of felt similar to how I felt about Purdue and the Illinois game. I felt like even though Florida State was withstanding runs and, Duke never had that spurt where they just kind of got out, I really do think I thought the whole game that, eventually they'd hit that one kind of, spurt where they go off and they win. And, Paolo Banchero kind of did it by himself at the end of the game or at the end of regulation, to kind of get them back into the game and then, tied up and then take the possession where they took the lead. Ultimately, they gave up a layup. A lot of people were talking about switching defenses there, and Coach K, his lack of getting Paolo the ball. But there's a lot of takeaways from this game, so let me break them down. So first and foremost, Wendell Moore Jr., I feel like still isn't 100% right. And what I mean by that is, COVID, a pause like that really takes away your rhythm. And for a player who, for all intents and purposes, was probably going to be ACC Player of the Year if he continued doing what he was doing, he's really, really found himself in a slump. I thought he broke out of it, with the 3 games beforehand, but I guess not. So that really, as a fan, it worries me. But as just a fan of college basketball, I'd really like to see him get back on track, because when he's on track, this Duke team is on track. Second takeaway from this game is Trevor Keels. How bad is his ankle injury? Some people I've seen have said a high ankle sprain, which is usually, I think, around 3 to 4 weeks, and it could be longer depending on how bad it is. If you saw him in the locker room as they were kind of testing it out, he looked to be not necessarily okay, but he looked to have, some pep to his step. So it very well could be a situation, where he comes back and he's perfectly fine. But it's just one of the, next game, or not next game, but in a couple weeks, and it's just one of those basketball injuries. But that's something definitely I'm going to keep an eye on. And then the last thing that I kind of want to touch on is, Paulo Banchero and the last possession. So a lot of people were wondering why Coach K did not force the issue in getting Paulo the ball. And I would personally argue that he did draw up something for Paulo to get the ball. If you watch the last possession, you can see, Wendell Moore kind of inbound. I think he had a little trouble getting it in, but then Paulo sort of kind of waves him off, which is why Wendell was kind of not necessarily stuck, but he just found himself in a position where he felt like he had to make a play. Overall, I think both of the teams in this game are very, very good. Duke, I think, is very, very good, obviously. And I think Florida State is a very underrated team. Leonard Hamilton always finds a way to find big, tall guys, and he just found some now that can shoot. So I truly think Florida State is a but I think they're an underrated team in terms of on the national level. I think they'll continue to get better. Their size, the way they can play defense, and if they get hot, the way they can shoot it is going to be tough for a lot of teams to kind of deal with, as we saw. So awesome game. Obviously not the outcome I wanted, but awesome game nonetheless. Really excited to see where both teams kind of go from there. I think Duke has Syracuse on Saturday. Not sure who Florida State has off the top of my head, but looking for a big bounce back out of the Blue Devils on Saturday, and for Florida State to kind of continue this run that they're on. As a matter of fact, I believe Florida State just beat Miami as well. So really looking forward to seeing what that team does. Next up, Iowa State and Texas Tech was a really good game. Personally, this game for me was a really tight defensive battle, which I kind of like somewhat, especially with all the offense we have nowadays. I think, Texas Tech's defense shined the brightest in the end. They held Iowa State to having only one starter in double figures, and that was Brockington, and I think he only had 12. And they committed 16 turnovers as well. So the defense really sped them up, got them going. And personally, I feel like no one's talking about this Texas Tech team. They only have 4 losses on the season. All of them are quad 1 losses. They also have but on the flip side, they have really good wins against quad 1 teams, including Baylor, Kansas, and now this Iowa State team, who they split the season series with. They're a really solid team that can get scoring from a few different areas, a few different people. It's not just one guy kind of, being the alpha, and then, you got guys chipping in. It's literally 4 guys who can all score. So I really feel like this Texas Tech team is underrated. But nonetheless, a very, very good game, a very exciting game, a very intense game. And, again, the Big 12. What do you expect? But continuing with that Big 12 notion of big, fun games, Kansas State and Texas actually turned out to be a very, very good game. It was a good one from start to finish, honestly. This Kansas State team is a lot better than what their record shows, and I think that should be the title of this show today, because we have a couple different teams that I'm going to talk about who are a lot better than the record. But if you just look at their schedule, you'll see a win over the aforementioned Texas Tech, and then honestly, they just have a bunch of close games they didn't finish. They have 3 of their 4 conference losses were by 3 points or less. And they've only lost 1 game all year by double digits. And I believe it was to Texas, who they lost to by 12, who in this game they beat. Mark Smith looked really solid out there leading Kansas State. But I felt like, again, just like with Duke and Purdue, I felt like Texas was somewhat in control in the first half. And even though the score was close, I just felt like at some point they would just kind of spread it out. Ultimately, though, I believe that them keeping the game close was a confidence booster for Kansas State, and they just made plays. And that's what it came down to, is just Kansas State made plays and Texas didn't, and that's why they came out on top. The next game here that I want to dive into is going back to the ACC, one that even Duke loses, but this one brought me joy. Miami proved again they're the real deal. I feel like, just like Texas Tech, they are very underrated. But Miami proved they're the real deal, and they just absolutely beat UNC like a drum. The game was over, in my opinion, by halftime, and UNC played about as bad as you can play, shooting only 33% from the field and 63% from 3. Really, no starter had a good game outside of Armando Bacot, who I believe was their leading scorer with 15. On the other side, though, Miami has 3 legit scorers. I mean, you have Isaiah Wong, who went off this game, but you also have Cameron McGusty and Charlie Moore. And Charlie Moore didn't even play all that well. Their big guy, whose name escapes me right now, really kind of picked up the slack for Charlie Moore. But all in all, man, they look for real. And they, like I said, they can score, they can somewhat defend, and I really believe the scoring part and somewhat the experience of having a senior in Charlie Moore, a senior, I believe, in Cameron McGusty. If not, he's been in college basketball forever. And then also having a young but very talented guy like Isaiah Wong, who I believe is a sophomore or junior this year. I really do think that this Miami team could definitely challenge in the ACC. I mean, they've already beaten Duke. They lost a close one to Florida State, but they've also taken care of UNC. So I really do think they could possibly challenge for that, second team in the ACC this year. And even when it comes to ACC tournament, or ACC championship time, winning that or being in the final. So it'll be really interesting. I'm really interested to see how this Miami team grows. I really do love Jim Larinaga. I loved him since he was at George Mason doing his thing. So I'm really interested to see, where this team goes and, kind of how they shake out the rest of the season. So next up is Villanova and Marquette, and this is a game that I really didn't see playing out this way. Marquette they gave Nova their 5th loss of the season, and they snapped their 29-game home win streak, and they look really poised while doing so. Shaka Smart's teams are always fairly good, but I didn't expect him to go to Villanova and win at Villanova. That just really doesn't happen, especially in the Big East. But it seems like every time Nova started to make one of their patented runs, Marquette fought back, kind of similar to how I was saying like Duke and Florida State. Every time there was a run made, they fought back and they kind of just withstood it. And, that's how they won the game. And the thing that interests me about this is I'm really interested to see how the Big East shakes out, because there are, to me, 4 to 6 teams that have a legit shot to challenge Nova to their crown, or 4 to 5 teams that have a shot to challenge Nova to their, Big East crown that they pretty much get every year. You have Providence, who's actually leading it. UConn, Seton Hall's in there, even though they've kind of dropped down in terms of the conference standings. Then you have a team like Marquette, and I know I'm missing one, but I'm really interested to see how the Big East shakes out this season, because Villanova is not the Villanova of past. You have Colin Gillespie there, but he's not he can't do everything, and normally you have 2 or 3 guys that really can help you out, but it's going to be very interesting to see how it shakes out, especially with Providence and UConn both being as good as they are. And like I said, I know I'm missing another team, but it's all good. The second to last game I want to kind of dive into in terms of like game recaps and stuff is Bama and LSU. And I'll start off by saying this. I think this game kind of has a caveat to it. But injuries play a part in basketball. That's part of the game. But I do think that if Xavier Pinson plays, I think he makes a small difference, but small enough to where I think LSU wins this game. LSU does turn the ball over even when he plays quite a bit, but I don't think they have 20 turnovers if he plays. And I know Alabama, plays fast. They speed you up. That's what they're kind of built to do. But if you just look at kind of the box score and then kind of how the game, if you watch the game, you would kind of see why what I'm saying makes a little sense. But to me, though, at the end of the day, this game really came down to 2 people, Jaden Shackelford and Darius Days, 2 of the best players in the conference. Shackelford had 26, Darius Days had 5. To me, that was the game. And sure, you had Easton come off the bench and pick up the slack for him, and he had 26, which is, I'm pretty sure it's their averages basically combined. But when you have a guy like Days who doesn't get his 13 points a game and, plays the way he plays, it takes away from it. And for, LSU really came back. They were down 68-60 with about a minute and some change left, and they lost 67-70. So they still had a chance to come back there and win it at the end. But I do think if Darius Days has a normal game and or they have Pinson, I think LSU comes out with the win. I have a lot of faith in LSU. I think LSU is a really, really good team. I think they have some deficiencies. Like I said, they turn the ball over a lot. They don't take necessarily the best shots. They can almost shoot themselves out of a lead. But, every team has some deficiencies. But I really like LSU, and I think they're a good squad. But Bama is a very, very talented squad as well. As you know, Jaden Shackelford, J.D. Davidson, Badiko, I hope I said his name right, and Javon Quinterly, guys like that. So yeah, but a very good game nonetheless. And then last but not least, I want to talk about IU and Purdue that happened last night. Yes, Purdue has on here twice. This one was, again, a surprise to me because Purdue was, again, controlling the game until around the 5-minute mark in the first half. At that point, it's just like IU flipped a switch. And the crazy part to me about this game is that Trace Jackson Davis really wasn't a part of this, as he got injured in Nebraska and he tried to play. I think he had like 11 minutes. He scored a bucket, but that was it. And he really didn't give you much. So it was like the bench really stepped up. I think they had a guy on the bench score 20. So again, the Big Ten and the Big 12 are my two favorite conferences this year. I think they are the two strongest. And again, we see it right here with a team like Indiana, who, without their best player, who is one of the better players in the country, found a way to come out on top. And I love that. That's what college basketball is all about. But, it was really awesome to see that. So now, looking ahead to not only this weekend, but also tonight, because this pod is going to drop on Friday evening. So as we look ahead, tonight we have a good one because it's huge for the Big Ten standings, and it's Michigan State and Wisconsin. To me, the game comes down, Michigan State will try to, stop Johnny Davis and his squad. And honestly, I think the key is not stopping Johnny Davis. It's really his supporting cast. The way I see it is Johnny's going to get his. He's a great player. Make it tough, but he's going to get his. But you got to stop Davison. You got to stop the other guys on the team from getting theirs. They're not the best players in the country. I mean, they play for Wisconsin. They're great players, but they're not Johnny. So if you can slow Johnny down, but also really kind of choke and, stop the squad, the rest of the squad, then I really think that Michigan State has an opportunity to win this game. I mean, they're long, they have great defenders, and they don't really have that go-to guy. So it's a real team effort. So I feel like if they give a really good team effort tonight, they have a shot to beat Wisconsin and, get a tie atop the standings of the Big Ten. Next up is a Saturday slate. It's UK and Auburn, which is honestly probably my favorite game of the weekend. These are the two best teams in the SEC, hands down, in my opinion. And I can't wait to watch it. Think about it. You have Jabari Smith and Wendell Green and crew going up against Oscar Tshiebwe and Ty and Severe Wheeler, Grady, and all those guys. And there's just so many good matchups throughout the game. But honestly, the two that I'm most interested in and the two that I think will really matter this game is Walker Kessler against Oscar Tshiebwe. First off, I don't think no one in the country has been able to stop Tshiebwe on the boards. I don't think Walker Kessler will be able to stop him either. But I do think that he could possibly give him some challenges around the boards if he comes out aggressive and looks to rebound. And then the other matchup that I'm really interested in is UK's guards and Severe Wheeler and Ty Washington versus Auburn's guards and KD Johnson and Wendell Green. I think you have two really good matchups right there. As among others, I'm sure Jabari Smith. I don't know if he'll be guarding like Kellen Grady or someone like that, but I think it just will be a really, really good game, a really interesting game. I see Auburn pulling it out at the end. I just think they're the better team, but really excited to see where this game goes and what the outcome is. Next up on my list is a very, very sneaky game that I love, and I think between Oklahoma State, who has 2 quad one wins, including over Texas. Similar to Kansas State, I think they are better than their record shows. But I do think Texas is going to have to be and will be ready this time. They're about to enter a brutal stretch where they play 5 ranked teams, including Tennessee, Kansas, and I believe Baylor, in a row, as well as a tough TCU team. So I feel like they're gonna be focused. I feel like they're gonna come out and try to handle business and understand that the stretch that they're going through is basically their season. If they can find a way to win, 4 out of the 6 games or 5 out of the 6 games or even all 6, they will be in a totally different place than if they weren't focused and come out and lose, lose 4 or 6. So I look for Texas to beat Oklahoma State this weekend, but don't be surprised if the game is, similar to the one earlier this year and Oklahoma State takes it. Last but not least, I want to get into my alma mater, and that's the Vols versus LSU. I think this is going to be a good rematch of a game that LSU won earlier this year. The Vols are kind of weird to me. They are a really good team with really great talent and experience, but it just hasn't clicked yet. But the wild part to me is that it's not that it hasn't clicked because they have newcomers or anything like that, because the lineup really hasn't changed. I mean, you have Kennedy Chandler, but everyone else from Vescovi to Josiah Jordan-James to Fulkerson in the center, even Euros off the bench, like all these guys that they have on this team, for the most part, outside of Kennedy Chandler and Huntley Hatfield and Ziegler, have been here. And so, yeah, you insert 3 new guys into your rotation, but like teams do that everywhere. So what is, with all this talent and experience, especially with a guy like Fulkerson on your team, like what is the hang up? Why haven't they clicked? And I don't know. But I will say I think the Vandy game possibly gave them a bit of confidence in that realm. And I think that could bleed over to this one. If they actually play defense, LSU's without Pinson, so if they actually play defense and can turn LSU over, I really think they have an opportunity to win this game, and I think they very well could. I mean, the Kentucky, they got blown out by Kentucky last weekend, but what I will say about that game is that I believe Kentucky just shot the lights out, because if you look at the box score, Tennessee didn't necessarily play that bad on offense, but when you have a team like that shoots the lights out, what can you do? So, like I said, if they play defense, I think the Vols have a real good shot at winning.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
All right, now shifting gears here, we're going to talk a little bit about bracketology. And honestly, this is one of my favorite subjects of the entire year. I absolutely love it. Joey Brackets, I believe, does, or Joe Lunardi, let me say his real name. I believe he does a fantastic job at doing these brackets every year. I really enjoy just kind of seeing teams rise and fall and things of that nature. But I have some issues with where he has some teams placed, as I'm sure a lot of people do. I think it's just natural. But first up is Arizona to me, and I'm gonna say the way I'm gonna put these out is statements, and so I have two main ones. So my first one is Arizona is not a 1 seed, and let me tell you why. To me, they haven't played anyone. They have games against USC, or I'm sorry. The games that they had against big-time teams, USC and UCLA, were both postponed. So those are 2 big conference games. So, yes, they only have 1 loss on the season, but it's to Tennessee. So, they only have 2 quad 1 wins, and both of those are against Wyoming and Illinois. And Wyoming is a very good team, but, and they're a quad 1 team. I'm sure they'll be a tournament team, but, it doesn't move the needle for me. The Illinois game as well is one where Illinois was at the very beginning of the season when they were going through that stretch. As we see now, Illinois is actually a very very good team, but that was when they going through the stretch. They didn't have Curbelo. wasn't the best Illinois team. Let me put it that way. So I don't see why they have so many. Why are they number one? I don't expect in the net rankings. It doesn't make sense to me, other than that they have one loss, and that one loss is to Tennessee, which I guess is a quad one loss. But I want to see them play somebody. I don't get the hype. When I watched them play Tennessee, they didn't look that good to me. And I really do think when they play the better teams in their conference, UCLA, USC, it'll show. I really do think it'll show in that they aren't, who they say they are. And I'll say this. If I'm wrong, if they beat UCLA, if they beat USC, I'll eat my words. But I really don't think they're that, I'm not going to say they're not that good. I think they're a solid team. I think they are a top 25 team, but I don't think they're it should be as highly regarded as they are. Another team that I feel like that, and who I've already discussed today, is Villanova. And my statement for them is why do they get so much leeway? As I said before, Nova has 5 losses now. And granted, 4 of those are quad one losses, but they still have 5 losses, including a stretch or a back-to-back games where they lost by 20 to both ranked Baylor, and Creighton, who's unranked. Now, granted, they got that Creighton loss back, but still, at the end of the day, I really do believe that Villanova, which they're currently a 4 seed in Joey Brackett's bracketology, I believe that they aren't. I just don't see it. I don't see why they are that high. To me, they should be a 5 seed, maybe even a 6. And granted, like I said, they have some solid wins, but if you look at most of their quad one wins, they have. 2 of them came from Xavier, who was a conference game, and 1 of them came from Creighton. And I think the other one is Seton Hall, maybe. So, solid teams, but, they're all in conference. So it's like, it just doesn't move the needle for me, And they, like I said, they just lost to Marquette. They still haven't played Connecticut yet. They still haven't played Providence yet, and they have to play both of those teams twice. So, as I said before, I'm really interested to see where the Big East goes, but I really do think that there is a very, very good possibility that they don't win it, and also a very, very good possibility, that they drop to maybe a 5, 6, and even possibly a 7 seed. But I do think the name across the chest, sort of kind of with UNC, which I'll get into later, it is really, really, really helping them out. Next up, I want to dive into my risers and fallers section of bracketology. I have 8 teams here, 4 that I think are going to rise and 4 I think that are going to fall, based on where they are currently right now in Joey Brackett's bracketology. Hold on, I lost it. Let me pull up the bracket yet again. But yeah, so let me just start off by saying the first team that I'm going to talk about is Mississippi State. Mississippi State, I think, is a team that is very, very, very underrated. I believe that they have enough to make the tournament for sure. Joey Brackett's right now has them as the first 4 out. I don't see that at all. I mean, they beat a very, very solid Alabama team. Excuse me. They beat a very solid Alabama team, and granted, they don't have like any real just standout wins other than that. But I do think that they have a stretch where they play still have UK to play, Texas Tech to play, Tennessee, LSU, Alabama again, as well as Auburn. So if they can get three of those games, down the stretch, and also they play in the SEC. So when you just kind of add on to that, it's a very, very good conference, so their strength of their conference is going to help them. And if they can grab some games down this, in this last few months, I really do think that they have a shot. Texas Tech would be a good non-conference game to pick up. If they can beat one of these ranked teams, whether it's UK, Texas Tech, Tennessee, or LSU, and then finish the season strong, I really do think they'll be solidly in. Iverson Molinar, it looks great. And I really, really like this team. So that's my first team to rise. My first team to fall will be the North Carolina Tar Heels. And for me, North Carolina, as I said earlier, they just don't have it to me this year. I just don't see a way they make they right now that they're in the tournament. They currently are a non-seed according to Joey Brackets. But they're losing games. They lost to, and they don't look like a solid team. They just lost to Miami by almost 30. They've already lost to ND or Notre Dame. Granted, they're still third in the ACC. They're tied with Duke at 4-2. So it's like, it feels like, they're still there, but realistically, they still have to play Duke twice. They still have tough games against like Virginia Tech and Florida State. So I really do. I think that they'll be all right. Just looking at the rest of their schedule, should they make the tournament? Yes. But the way they're playing right now, I could definitely see a situation where they just falter down the stretch. They say, for example, if they lose to those 4 teams I just named, Duke twice, Virginia Tech, they split with Virginia Tech, and then they lose to Florida State. That at that point they have 9 losses going into the ACC tournament. They should get in just based on name recognition, but they'll be like a 12 seed. So it's interesting to see how they play out. But I like I said, I think they will make the tournament. Name recognition, I think they'll have enough solid wins to get in, but I wouldn't be surprised if they falter down the stretch because they just aren't a very cohesive and solid team to me right now. On the other hand, let's go back to the risers, and one of my favorite teams that I really love right now is Texas A&M. Texas A&M, shout out to them. They have a former Duke guy, Henry Coleman, but they have been a really solid team all year. They have 3 losses, to me, 3 solid teams, and 2 in Wisconsin and Kentucky, obviously really great teams, and then also to TCU, who is who's a sneaky solid team in the Big 12. They're not going to make any noise in the Big 12 or anything like that, but they can beat any team on any given night. But outside of that, man, Texas A&M has looked solid. Before losing to Kentucky, they were on a 9-game win streak, including going 4-0 to start their conference play. They play Arkansas this weekend, which is a very winnable game for them. But I really do think if they just finish strong, like they still have LSU to play, Tennessee to play, LSU to play again, Auburn to play, as well as Alabama. So I really do think if they just finish strong, maybe pull a couple of those games in before heading to the SEC tournament. I really do think they could be top. I think it's 4 seeds over there, so top 4 seed in the SEC tournament and really make some noise, and find their way in the NCAA tournament. So this is a really solid team. I feel like they're well rounded, and they make games ugly, and that's what they did against Kentucky. They made it ugly. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how they keep going. Buzz Williams has a really solid squad over there. Next up on the fall list, I'm going to talk about the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma, to me, is a solid team. They're one of those teams that just kind of is there. They're 12-6 right now, but they have 3 straight losses. And they played Texas, and they lost to Texas. They have already lost to Baylor. They've lost to TCU, and they lost to Kansas. So their big opportunities, they still have some big opportunities left, but it's kind of, they weren't, those games that they lost, I wouldn't say weren't close, but Baylor by 10, Texas by 14. TCU beat them by 1, but TCU's, like I said, they're not going to make, any real big noise within the conference. And then also also Kansas, which they lost by 3, but, I would like to say that it was a lot because Abaji didn't, he hurt his hand in the first half. So if you look at the rest of their schedule, they still have Baylor to play. They have Auburn, Texas Tech, Kansas again, Texas again. So they have some opportunities to make up some ground, but I don't think that their team. I just don't think their team is really good enough to do it. Tanner Groves, their leading scorer, he averages about 13 a game. And then after that, you have Gibson, but it just kind of there's no real scorer. There's no real guy like Jordan Goldwire is the point guard. There's no real standout guy on this team is what I'm trying to get at. And I think that's going to hurt them down the stretch. Like I said, I'm really interested to see, though, where this goes and how this works out. But I just see Oklahoma as a team that is falling and could possibly just fall out of the tournament. Next up is another Rise team, and that is the Miami Hurricanes. And I don't really have to go in depth on them. I kind of gushed over them earlier. But, like I said, they have 3 legit scorers and Moore, McGusty, and Wong. They are solid enough on defense to where they can make it a little tough for teams. But, when you can score like they can score and shoot like they can shoot, I really do think that they're going to be the type of team that is good for tournaments. It's six games, 6 days, or 6 games over, a couple weekends or whatnot. And you just got to be hot for those 6 games. And this is a team who can get hot at any point and just stay that way. So I really do think Miami will continue to rise within Joey Brackett's bracket. Right now they are 8 seed. They're 8 seed and projected to win the ACC. I think if they do that and win the ACC tournament, they won't be an 8 seed. I see them as more of like a 6, 7 seed. Like if you look at I see them more as like a 6 seed. If you look at the 6 seeds going around, you got like USC, who I think they could kind of overtake because they have a couple more or better wins than USC does. As well as a team like Ohio State. Like Ohio State plays in the Big Ten, though. Ohio State has some really good wins, but I do think they're in that tier of a 5 or a 6 seed. So I said 6, 7, but I think they're more in the 5, 6 range. So really, really love what Miami's doing down there. Next up, my second to last fall team is Seton Hall. Seton Hall to me is a very interesting team to watch. They're 11-5. They're a good team. As you saw by early season, like I know Michigan's not good, but beat Michigan earlier in the year. Played Ohio State close. Beat Texas earlier in the year. Really hadn't had a bad loss this year outside of the DePaul game, and that's a conference game, so you kind of know how those goes. But in terms of score, they haven't really lost a game by more than 5, 6 points. So they're a solid team. Don't get me wrong, but I think when it comes down to it in their conference, I believe they're going to beat the teams they have to beat or they should beat, and lose to the teams that should beat them. So Xavier, they still have to play again. Villanova, Connecticut, they actually have to play Xavier twice. I think they lose all 4 of those games. As well as, you still have a team like Marquette who just beat them. I think they could beat them again. So I definitely see Seton Hall just falling just based off of how strong their conference is, and that I don't really see them picking up any of those games. Like I said, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll eat my words, but I don't believe that I will be. But no, it's definitely going to be fun to watch and see kind of where they go from there. Next up is my last Rise team, and that is the Florida State Seminoles. And I know, again, just kind of ran through them and talked about them, but they have a very, very solid team. Caleb Mills, who I got a chance to really just watch for the first time in the Duke game, looked really good. And again, when you have Cameron Fletcher, someone who's a 5-star from Kentucky, come over, like they just have a solid team. Not to mention, on top of all that, they have a 7-footer. They start 2 7-footers, including one that can shoot a 3. So, when you have that type of length and you play the style that Leonard Hamilton likes to play, I really think they're always in for an opportunity to make some noise in the tournament. So I'll be interested to see how they look, but I think they're going to be a team on the rise for sure. I don't see them, faltering. I see them having a strong finish to the season. So I'm really excited to see that and to kind of see that team come together. Obviously as a Duke fan, I want to beat them, but I really I'm going to enjoy watching them because I love Leonard Hamilton. I love the way he coaches, and I love the style they play. So yeah. And last but not least, my last Rise team, my last fall team, sticking in the state of Florida, and we're talking about the University of Florida Gators. I personally don't see it. They're 9th in the SEC currently, 2-3 in conference, They lost to all the good teams, including Alabama, Auburn, and LSU. Their biggest win so far this season is over Ohio State, a 3-point win over Ohio State early in the season when I believe that everyone was hurt. So to me, they don't really have any good, real solid wins other than the two early in the season. And they have not necessarily a tough stretch going down, but they still have to play Tennessee again, Kentucky, Auburn, and UK. And I don't think they beat any of those teams, as well as tough games against like Vanderbilt. Against Vanderbilt. Ole Miss is not an easy win. Conzo down there in Missouri, not an easy win. Any game in the SEC is not easy outside of this year, maybe Georgia. They have Texas A&M, who I will think will be ranked, and they play Oklahoma State, who I've talked about. So really don't see Florida finishing the season strong. I really do think they're going to just kind of lose out or not lose out. I really think they're going to lose their way out of the tournament is what I was getting at. So the last thing that I want to dive into is a little bit of recruiting news. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a very, very interesting story to me. It's about a Kentucky commit. Shaden Sharp, essentially he joined Kentucky this month to be on their roster this year, which is a very, very good add. But here's my thing about that, or the interesting part about it. So he can actually apply for the 2022 NBA draft, which I find very interesting. So what this means, So what this means is essentially he could never play basketball for Kentucky. Obviously, he might play here in a little bit, but he honestly could never play for Kentucky and go to the NBA, which means that Kentucky's next year's class, I guess that would be their 2022 class, could lose one of the best players out of it, which sucks. So it's really, really interesting. His mentor said that he's not really in a rush. Calipari has come out and said that he plans on being there next year, but it's very interesting to see. And so I don't necessarily I guess he had enough credits to graduate high school before the start of the NBA season. So technically he was already in college or had the opportunity to be in college. So he just got there. So he is eligible to play, but he hadn't played yet, like I said. And I think he will. So he'll turn 19 and before the draft, so he'll, he falls in line with everything that it needs to go. So I just think this will be really, really interesting to see, especially if he plays and gets in and plays and starts playing well. Then, Kyle's got a not a problem on his hands, but yeah, he's got a problem on his hands if that happens. But just a very interesting story that I wanted to talk about. That I think is going to be fun to watch play out. Next, or the last thing that I want to kind of get into today is sticking on recruiting. But I want to talk about the recruiting rankings. So a lot of people gave their thoughts on ESPN, who reshuffles their recruiting rankings every so often for the current class and the classes that come after it. So things that I found interesting were and I like to compare them to 24/7 Sports. That's because to me 24/7 Sports is the go-to for all things recruiting. ESPN is good for basketball with being Cardi, and they're solid in football, but I just think 24/7 Sports does it an amazing job, and they're way more plugged in my opinion. So if you look at it, they kind of the same at the top. You got Lively as number 1 in both. You have Amari Bailey at number 2 in both. Keontae George is in 3 in ESPN's. He's 4 in 24/7. You got Flipowski and Derek Whitehead. That's the top 5. That top 5 has pretty much been the same for for this whole time, so it's really not going to change. Nick Smith is still up there on both. But then this is where we start getting some discrepancies. So like I said, I really like what 24/7 has. For example, they have a guy like Chris Livingstone in their top 10, which I think he should be. Brandon Miller, who I think should be higher in ESPN's, which is ridiculous. He's not. He's number 11 over there for 24/7. A guy like Dylan Mitchell, who's making his rise now on 24/7 boards, I think I'm not gonna say he's too high. I don't ever want to say a younger kid is too high or too low on this recruiting scale, because it's all about who sees what in you and that type of deal. But I guess let me just say the main problem I have with these, and it kind of stems from a Duke guy, but I feel like it's a lot of guys who are following this, is Mark Mitchell somehow is ranked 31st in the class. He's ranked 13th on 24/7. To me, he is a top 5, or he's a top 10 player for sure, but a top 5 player in this class. He plays for the best high school team. He's the best player on the best high school team, and he shows out every time he plays. It doesn't really make sense to me why he's so low. I don't know what ESPN has, if they have anything against him or anything like that. It just doesn't really make sense to me why why Mark Mitchell is as low as he is. He should be a 5-star. Just looking at 5 stars above him. Excuse me. Just looking at some guys above him, it doesn't really make sense to me why he's not great. His own teammate Grady Dick, who's a great player. I don't want to take anything away from Grady. He's a great player. But when you watch these games, Mark Mitchell takes over, if not just as much, if not more than he does, and yet Grady's the 8th ranked player and a 5-star, and Mark Mitchell is a 4-star and a 31st ranked player. So, just some interesting things to think about when it comes to just when I look at these, balance these two out, where these guys are. So, really interested to see, like I said, I don't ever want to, make a, knock a kid down or, by his ranking. Because at the end of the day, rankings don't really matter. It's just about where you go, if it's a good fit for you. But I still think that there's some guys that are, looked at as underrated. And I think Mark Mitchell to ESPN still is somehow, even though to me he's one of the best players in the country. So that'll wrap it up today for the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast. I want to thank all of you for joining me to hear me rant and ramble about my favorite sport. Please watch the games this weekend. Enjoy them. Be safe. And I can't wait to dive back into the week of college basketball next week. So without further ado, peace.